Patrick is a Flemish movie about Patrick, a carpenter in a nudist colony who, eventually, loses his hammer. This hammer is of course symbolic to him and becomes of great importance after his father dies and he ends up forced to take over the family business. That business being, managing the nudist club, clean the grounds and keep all the characters who visit this nudist camp during their vacation. For people who know Flemish movies, it's pretty common to have at least one sex scene in them, and nudity and being performed in a nudist colony. There's always someone naked in this film. The main character, played by Kevin Janssens, who gained many pounds to make this movie, flaunts his dong. The dad flaunts his dong. Women walk bare with their tits out. It's a nudist colony. Why they chose to do this is beyond me, but it's typical for Flemish movies as far as I'm concerned. It's an extra edge, an extra layer to a story that is a little weak otherwise. Set this in a normal camp and it already loses some of the allure. And with allure I mean novelty, as there are not a lot of pretty people in this film. In fact, the only pretty person is almost always dressed as if she knew she didn't need to be naked for this role. Overall, Patrick is an okay movie about a man trying to accept 3 new cards dealt to him in life and trying to make the best out of it whether he wants to or not. I don't know if I liked the ending, as I found it quite fatalistic and a betrayal to the person and talented he is. But maybe I missed something. You tell me. Check that. Malibu High is a late 70s exploitation flick that tries to bring us some good old 80s sex flick about college teens and their party people exploits. We follow high school student Kim Bentley, who is having a rough time and becomes a prostitute who blackmails her teachers for good grades. It doesn't stop there, however, and she quickly changes jobs by becoming an assassin. Yes, she goes from college dram to prostitute to assassin. The problem with this movie is that it lacks the goofball comedy that is part of many 80s sex spoofs. It takes itself a little too serious, which brings down the film. There's boobies and sexy scenes, but even those aren't titillating enough in my opinion. The main character, though pretty, is a total bitch and she acts like a cunt to everyone, especially her archenemy she has a feud with during the whole movie. Malibu High isn't a good movie. It's a movie that tries to do too much and in turn does too little to offer an interesting, entertaining film to the viewer. The weird twists, sex and violence is enjoyable while it lasts, but once the movie ends you'll end up saying, okay, well, that was it then, never to see or think about it ever again. Malibu High should have left an impression and, unfortunately, for me, it didn't. Oh, and it didn't look like the movie from the poster either. It doesn't even include the main actress since she asked too much money to be on the poster. Check that. A simple naive man, played by a young Gary Busey, accidentally kills his brother-in-law and flees to Mexico to escape the law. During his travels he encounters a gritty cowboy called Barbarosa, or Redbeard, played by legendary singer Willie Nelson. Together with Barbarosa they walk the dangerous desert areas leading to and through Mexico, come across some nice western cliches only to find out the true reason Barbarosa is who he is. A reluctant bond is formed between the two men as they are being pursued by several entities trying to get their heads. Barbarosa is an enjoyable western movie that comes close to being a spaghetti western but isn't, as stated by Siskel and D, but it's a story of betrayal, vendetta, honor and dignity, and it will leave you smiling while the credits roll. Barbarosa is a movie I didn't know about before seeing it pop up somewhere, and that's a shame. It is most definitely among some of the better and more interesting westerns out there, and Gary Busey's role in it is a far cry better than stuff he did later on. Go check it out, partner. Check that. Dirty O'Neill is a handsome cop in a small Californian town. He is so handsome that he has no problem asking any woman he encounters if they want him to write a nice long ticket. Everything is fine and dandy until 3 hoodlums start making trouble in the neighborhood. Dirty O'Neill is, maybe intentionally, a combination between Dirty Harry and a sex comedy. Most of the movie is the portrayal of the life of this handsome cop and what he does with all the hot women he can stop during his boring work. And then, crime enters the picture, and much like real life, a life can and will be turned upside down when you encounter it. Dirty O'Neill is labeled as sexploitation, but in my opinion it's a little bit more than that. There's an actual story, albeit thin, in this fairly gritty though light-hearted movie. I think the contrast between these styles are intentional, showing the dichotomy between a peaceful neighborhood with consensual and happy flappy carefree sex and a violent hood where rape and violence slaps you around. Go watch Dirty O'Neill. It's over before you know it, but it's a very enjoyable movie in my opinion. Also boobies. Smash that. Back in the late 90s I bought a VHS cassette with 2 episodes of serial experiment Lain, which then left me confused and baffled as I didn't have access to any of the other episodes of this then innovative series. 2 decades later I finally decided to watch the rest of it, and I'm still slightly confused about this, now less cutting-edge Japanese anime series. In Serial Experiments Lain we follow Lain Iwaru after one of her, friends kills herself. She, or at least her voice, all of a sudden seems to appear in a virtual reality network called The Wired. Being a series from 1998, The Wired is kind of like an internet, but not really. It's the internet people said that would happen but didn't. Mainly because of corporate interference removing all the anarchy from it. Regardless, Lain is a surreal trip into some kind of techno trip. It's said to have avant-garde imagery and explores topics like identity, communication and what reality is, things that by now have been done to death in many movies, main ones being The Matrix and Ghost in the Shell to name a few adjacent. It's also considered to be very cyberpunk, has conspiracy theories and other stuff. It's a mismatch of all kinds of stuff coming out of the brain of someone who took LSD and is a little bit off. It's an experience, an experiment, an artsy-fartsy series about which you can talk and discuss for days. Unfortunately, after seeing it completely now and letting it ruminate a bit, I'm sad to say that I pretty much forgot what the hell was going on. I know bits and pieces, fragments, which is normal since the show itself is fragmented. It succeeds in making you think. It fails in keeping it coherent and active in your brain so you can talk about it a week later. Lain tries to do a lot, and kinda succeeds. It's the perfect movie for a pre-tween figuring out the world and how life works, using their brains and stepping into the world of psychology, identity, technology and other stuff, and feeling that there's a profound thing they have discovered. As an old robot, however, it's simple stuff made confusing with artsy-fartsy effects to make it look cool. Check that. What do you get when you combine Magnum Pie, the original one, not the crappy remake, with the A-Team and Indiana Jones? You get something that looks a lot like Tales of the Gold Monkey, a 1982 adventure series where Stephen Collins plays Jake Cutter, an ex-Flying Tigers fighter pilot who is now the operator of an air cargo delivery service in the South Pacific right at the start of World War II around 1938. The pilot for this enjoyable series even has Higgins, from Magnum Pie, play a Nazi officer, and it has a recurring role for Ivan / a Nazi spy who is quit the horn dog and likes to bless the female natives in prayer. Unfortunately, most of the Nazi plot is drowned in the rest of the show and replaced mostly with a Japanese edge around the very attractive Princess Koji played by Marta Du Bois, who is as deadly and sexy as a Black Widow. We also have Corky, a kinda dumb mechanic and friend to Jakey who is dealing with PTSD and memory loss. Bonchance Louis, who survived a guillotine trial and is now the magistrate in the fictional Bora Gora. And finally the love interest played by Caitlin O'Heaney, who is a typical American oldies singer but also an American spy and operative using the bar for her activities. During the 13-episode run of this series we have many adventures and all are narrated like a noir film, or like Magnum did during his. The soundtrack feels like the A-Team and the looks is on par with Indiana Jones. including how Jake Cutter and the rest looks, and it works. It works well. I'm just sad they didn't get more seasons so we could have seen more of the Nazi plot and going a little bit more in depth into what ISS going on before the war in this area of the Pacific. All the factions, characters are an excellent way to have some very interesting stories, but alas, despite good ratings it was dropped and that's sad. What annoyed me a little bit in the series was the constant breakage of the plane Jake flies and Corky's memory loss, but it's made up with the recurring gag with Jake's dog Jack, a small cute doggo who wears an eye patch and is pissed off Jake lost his opal and star sapphire eye. Jack is also smart, often offering the solution to a problem and talking by barking twice for yes and once for number. It doesn't completely have the visual style as Indiana Jones, but that's understandable due to the budget constraints of a series, especially a serialized one back in the day. It's said that Tales of the Golden Monarch wouldn't fly these days, and they're probably right, but I would go further and say it needs to come back with the same sentiments, same vibe, more Nazis, more Japanese sex princesses and more mad monkeys who worship golden idols. I mean, come on. How good does that sound? Make it happen once this woke nonsense disappears from our lives. Tales of the Golden Monkey deserves multiple seasons. Check that. Back in the 80s, the pop culture phenomenon called Masters of the Universe hit the toy aisle. It was Conan the Barbarian mixed with science fiction and fantasy. It followed the story of He-Man, a barbaric man who left his land and ventured into Eternia to become its ruler, meeting all kinds of fantastic people and creatures that stood with him or fought against him. Told through little comic books that came with the toys, the story was told, and then they made an animated show about it and changed some things, and thus He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was born. Animated by Toei Animation, they turned the barbaric He-Man into Prince Adam, a fairly pansy muscle boy dressed in pink who flees from any trouble with his equally pansy tiger Cringer. Fleeing cause with the magical sword, he can become He-Man, the strongest man on Earth. When he lifts his sword aloft, he changes into pretty much Superman without the cape or any of the special powers. Together with the warrior Princess Teela, his friend Man-at-Arms, the comedic sidekick from another dimension Orko, and many others, they fight Skeletor and his minions to keep control over Eternia and its magical source within Castle Grayskull. The animation in this series isn't the best. It's cheap and simple, especially in comparison with the animation in the first episode of the new Motu series by the dickhead Kevin Beatty Crying Eyes Smith. But the show has heart and soul, and that's worth way more than the shit show Smith delivered us decades after Motu stopped broadcasting. The original Motu animated show isn't perfect, but it's a far cry from Smith's scrap. It gets a bad rap due to people disregarding it for being a long toy commercial, which quite frankly isn't right, cause we watched the show cause we already had the toys and the long list of memes that have been made about the gayness of Prince Adam. And so we woke in the morning and we stepped outside, and we took a deep breath and get real high, and we screamed from the top of my lungs. What's going on? He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is a classic animated show and should be treated as such. You should look past its flaws and realize the importance it had in its time, fueling the franchise who already had great stories delivered in mini comics and newspaper comics, storybooks, audio cassettes and everything else. For people who love Masters of the Universe, this is a must-see. It's a shame that the new series has little or nothing to do with this show. I would have loved to see a continuation of this where all the characters get their due. I still need to see the 2002 version, however, so maybe I'll see some Hordak and his horde in that one. Masters of the Universe is an iconic franchise undeservedly labeled as for kids due to this show, but it remains an amazing world with a lot of potential, at least until dickheads like Kevin the Liar Smith get their hands on it. Smash that. The Batman is the long-awaited newest Batman, where Robert Pattinson stepped into the role of Bruce Wayne and his alter ego the Batman, or vice versa. Don't shoot me, You get the point. Many people were worried since they still remember Pattinson from the crappy Twilight movies, but personally I was intrigued to see what he would do with the role since his acting has been quite enjoyable in most of the movies I saw him in. He is also a major troll in real life, which didn't help with the marketing for this movie. Regardless, The Batman brings us Batman in his second year or crime-fighting vigilantes as he punches his way through criminals only to find himself up against Proto-Riddler, who is killing people in a 7-esque way. The Batman finally returns to his roots as the best detective on Earth, but alas, I didn't see a lot of great detective work personally. That title is still given to Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot, even Columbo, before the Batman. But hey, we get a gritty movie about a serial killer and throw in some Boston-esque Irish cops versus the mob. Sprinkle in an unrecognizable penguin who only walks with a limp and a black Catwoman who has a lot of cats and apparently fucked Pattinson on the Batmobile before bitching in the media that she wasn't treated decently as a multi-millionaire minority. The feel of the movie is quite interesting. Dark and brooding, though the makeup and hairdo of Bruce Wayne makes him look like an emo. And that's a look I don't want on my Bruce Wayne, not even in the second year. The enemies, in the form of the Riddler and the Penguin, aren't Batman enough. They're too normal. The insanity, which is a big part of the Batman mythology, isn't ramped up. I guess this is once again because of it being the second year, but still, if you look back at the Gotham series, which was pretty much before year one, it was quite insane pretty much from the start. This is what I missed in this movie. It's Batman, but it's not. Even Bale's Batman has the weirdness ramped up more. This is too grounded in a way. I didn't care it was 3 hours long since the plot itself kept me interested, but it should have been more violent, more comic book, and a wee bit more Seven. Maybe the next movie? Who knows? Check that. Now and then, here and there is a late 90s anime series about war and the horrors that it brings with. We follow Shozusu Matsutani, a happy carefree boy who loves his life and enjoys climbing very tall towers and sit on them. Normal people would be afraid to fall off, but not him. Nope. He sees a hot chick sitting on the next tower and tries to connect, but then, out of nowhere, mechanized dragons and war machines attack the girl. What's a boy to do? Jump to her rescue, of course. And he does, before he gets transported to whatever future or world and is forced to join an army of children and fight for water and land and power. What follows is 13 episodes of great animation and great story. It shows you the horrors of war, from child souls to rape, violence, torture, POWs, death, poverty, famine, the madness of those in charge, the lot. Much like Grave of the Fireflies and some other anti-war animes, it's heavy material, but now and then, here and there, doesn't fall into the pitfall of making you feel depressed as fuck after watching it. Now and then, here and there is critically acclaimed for a reason, and I would very much recommend it to anyone who likes good stuff. Take my word for it and go watch this. Check that. Use the Flower of Evil is a weird Spanish movie about a preacher called El Señor, aka the Lord, who is a type of cult in the mountains. Like a lot of cult leaders, eventually you fall through and your lies become more apparent, and so it happens here, where our antagonist loses control over his flock, and mainly his 3 daughters. All this pretty much starts when a blue-eyed blonde-haired kid is introduced to the group and proclaimed to be the new messiah. Each of his daughters goes their own path and has their own crisis of faith, and it all, eventually, comes tumbling down. Use the Flower of Evil attracted me with the poster of a horned woman walking off towards something. I figured it would be a type of pagan tale of religion and good versus evil, like The Witch or The Ritual. Unfortunately, and even though there are elements of these movies in here, it doesn't quite go that way. It kinda does, but not enough, as we pretty much are shown the folly of our preacher as he rages through the pretty jungle-like environment, killing and raping in between scolding his daughters. The religious part wasn't there enough for me, in my opinion, as it was just a strange man doing something on the mountain. It would have been more effective if this strange blonde kid actually introduced some kind of, fake or not, miracle which could have been a ploy of the preacher. Using a horn goat immediately takes you into paganistic lore, so giving him more screen time like Black Phillip from The Witch for example. But it doesn't happen. Use Flower of Evil looks great and can be considered as the Spanish Midsommar in my opinion, but, as mentioned, I would have preferred it was the Spanish The Ritual or Hereditary. Check that.